Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing another really awesome guest today. We have the honor of being joined today on the show by Alex Reed. Alex is a co-founder and the president and chief commercial officer of a company called Fluence Analytics, now known as Yokogawa Fluence Analytics, following its acquisition by the Yokogawa Electric Company of Japan. They are a manufacturer of systems that produce continuous data streams, enabling real-time optimization of both manufacturing and R&D processes. Prior to co-founding Fluence Analytics, Alex worked as the Associate Director for Operations and Strategy at the Tulane Center for Polymer Reaction and Monitoring Characterization. This is an R&D center at Tulane, which is responsible and active in fundamental and applied polymer research. Alex co-founded originally the Advanced Polymer Monitoring Technologies company to commercialize technologies developed at Tulane-PolyRMC. His vision and leadership ultimately took the company from spin out to patented laboratory concepts to ultimately a commercial company developing these innovative products and services for various manufacturers of both chemical and biopharmaceuticals. Alex serves on the board of the Smart Manufacturing Leadership Coalition and the Applied Polymer Technology Extension Consortium. He did an undergraduate degree in economics and Latin American studies and a minor in business administration from Tulane. In 2016, he was recognized as one of the 30 under 30 recipients and has been recognized from several local incubator innovation awards. A lot of really cool themes that we don't normally get into on the show, but are really instrumental in the sort of the global sphere of the different companies that we cover on the show. So I'm really excited to the conversation and really honored to have him with us. Alex Reed, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thanks for having me, Ira. Look forward to chatting with you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really looking forward to a lot of the themes. And as I was joking before the show, a lot of things that you did in terms of, working with your father and, ultimately taking a company from early stage to an acquisition. I've been there myself some couple decades ago. So I was excited and proud to see you going in that direction. So really great stuff. But, love to start off, at the beginning, Alex, just talking a little bit more about you, a little of your background, everything from where you grew up to were you always interested in business? Did you have your sights on being an entrepreneur early on? Tell us a little bit more about your background, if you would.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ira. So born and raised in New Orleans. You want to know where I'm from and where I grew up. So that's my hometown. As you mentioned, all the activity, professionally came out of the university there at Tulane. And that's because my father was a physics professor there. He's still there. He's a professor the Merchant Mallory Chair in Physics, and he also has a dual appointment in chemical engineering. But yeah, growing up, you could imagine both my parents were academics. My dad, the physics professor who speaks 7 languages, kind of this man of all interests. And my mother, also an academic at Tulane. She was a professor there as well. Taught Spanish culture, civilization. We spent a lot of time traveling. I grew up speaking Spanish and French. I'm trilingual. And so it's a very interesting environment to grow up in, one that I credit heavily for the future, because one of the biggest things that I think they instilled in me was curiosity. And without that, I don't think entrepreneurship is possible. Frankly, for me, that desire to learn, to grow, to build, to solve problems that came from that environment. And so asking about the genesis, I think it starts that early is just how you raise your kids, believe it or not, can have an impact. And I was very fortunate to have those experiences and have great parents to guide me on that journey. So then when life presented itself with these different opportunities, I think there's some innate stuff, there's some program stuff, but they have to come together along with that opportunity to create that perfect mix of, okay, you're the right person at the right place at the right time to do this, right? And I'm sure you hear it all the time on your show. And so it kind of evolved that way. So I grew up working in the lab. So my dad, he got my brother and I involved, and I took an interest to it. So, we were running instruments, doing inventory, anything they needed to help the operation. And I was always very interested in business from a very young age. But I always thought I'd be more on the finance side. I was monitoring like stock prices and gold prices and commodity prices when I was like 5 or 6. Like my dad taught me where to look in the newspaper, and I would track it over time, and I was always interested in that stuff. Um, and then I studied it as you mentioned in the intro. Um, but I caught I'd say the technology bug because, finance is great. It enables a lot of things, right? Commerce and flow of capital and credit make it all possible, right? We raise venture money. I'll get into some of that. So like you need finance to make innovation happen. But what I realized was I was far more interested in the actual innovation. Like how do you actually do something that's going to make a difference in the world, and all the steps it takes to make something work. And in this case, we're talking about deep tech,
Right.
IP, hardware with software and math, basically rolling it all together in a complex solution. Um, so, by the way, you want me to I could keep talking about the intro. Is this okay?
Yeah, no, it's extremely interesting, and and I'd like to, if you could say a couple more words about your father, Professor Dr. Wayne Reed, because you introduced him as a physicist, but he's much more. I mean, he's a polymer physicist, a
Correct.
biophysicist, teaches everything from general physics to advanced optics, has written several books. And one of the most interesting things in just looking through his patents and his papers is he really is sort of it's sort of the ultimate sort of technology transfer story. I mean, it's not just it's, basic research. I mean, he's got papers in here with the folks at Moderna who we've profiled with the mRNA. He's got Spark Therapeutics relationships and papers. So he's really done the full spectrum of it, taking
I,
something off
I
the
was I was
bench.
building to that. Yeah,
Yeah, take us there because I think not this is the Alex Reed show, but I want you to talk about Professor Wayne Reed because I think
for
this is
sure.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was building up to that. So basically, as you mentioned, once I started working in the lab and seeing what he was working on, uh, it was as you were mentioning, it was this very interesting mix of um, as you, basic science that then became applied, that then he got sourced with problems as he talked to industry because he started doing consulting. So a lot of what I've seen out there, there's multiple different types of academics, right? There's the ones that are trying to solve very tactical problems, and there's the ones that are asking the very big questions. So he had the range.
Yeah.
He could ask the big questions, but then was able to channel that into trying to solve problems. So with all that fundamental knowledge, because as you mentioned, he went and started applying it to polymers, which are large molecules, and then that was a natural segue to, well, what about biopharma? Those are large molecules too. So the approaches he was making on characterization and analysis of the behaviors of all these different molecules was the unifying thread of his whole body of work. And it led to about hundreds of publications, a number of patents, and then also led to he wrote a book on chemical monitoring, chemical reaction monitoring, but recently just published a book on biophysics.
Yeah.
So for him, it's all about, if you ask him, he started his career, how he got into physics. He started as a philosophy major. He wanted to answer the questions of life. He quickly realized, this is his own words, that philosophy wasn't going to answer those questions sufficiently for him. So he switched to physics to get to the bottom of it, right? And so I think if you look at his career and the work he's done, it's been asking and seeking to answer those questions. But obviously, any one of us we're just too small to answer them all. So you got to pick a place to apply that knowledge, and that's what he did. And so lately, his primary interests are in the biospace. So as you know, he's been doing work with Moderna and a number of other. He worked with Biogen years ago, and a bunch of other companies and mRNA, DNA, and the peptides and proteins. So really the whole gamut of that, and he's on the cutting edge there still. He's still doing research active at the university.
Yeah.
And so it was that foundation that I walked into. So in the lab, working with him, seeing all this great basic science that was then being funded and applied uh, to real problems from companies funding research. And what was interesting was seeing how much value that they were getting at the end of our work. So we would do some projects, and we were giving them all kinds of new insights on what they were making. So, for example, we would be monitoring these polymerizations. A lot of them, you just take a sample at the end and see what you made. So we were giving them kinetics, we were giving them real-time information on the properties while it was being synthesized, and it was huge for them. So having that level of understanding of their reactions was unparalleled. And so we got that question a few times. Well, this is great research. So what else can you do for us? And then the answer at this time, I was still undergrad. The answer was, well, we're a university. We could do more research. The idea wasn't let's build you a product, right? And so we were very fortunate that at that center we had a number of advisors. My chairman, Bill Bottoms, he was on the board of the university. He was a PhD physicist as well. He was in the whole semiconductor wave from the 70s through the early 2000s and beyond in Bay Area. And so he had been CEO of public companies. He was at the forefront of all that stuff, and he was my personal mentor in the process. And so he's like, well, this is a situation where you have an opportunity and a decision. Do you want to spin something out, get a commercial activity going around the patents, and start working with these customers that are asking you for a product? Or do you keep doing research or try to license it out? And so at the time, I was very young and very naive, and thought, yeah, sounds great. Let's start a company. I mean, in my 20s, I see the news, I hear about Zuckerberg and Musk and all these people. This is late 2011, 12 timeframe. It's like, oh, entrepreneurship looks amazing. Let's do this. If I knew now, or if I knew then what I know now, I think I might not have started, right? Because it's a lot harder than it looks. And what you see the big announcements and the successes, but all that in between time is very challenging. So anyway, so that led to the spin out is basically that foundational work from my dad at the university, solving those problems, having that very experienced commercialization person and the entrepreneur, me, willing to go do the work, right? So like someone's got to go do this now. And then we had a fourth co-founder, Mike Drensky, our CTO. And so he was my dad's grad student. He was super hands-on, technical, very good with the technology. So it was almost that ideal team that you would want to take something this complicated out of a university to then go to commercialize it.
Mm.
And so that's what we did. We started the company at that point. And being in New Orleans, there wasn't a ton of capital. And so we had to be very creative. So we actually worked out deals with early customers to fund product development. We ended up getting grant funding from the federal government, Science Foundation, Department of Energy Advanced Manufacturing Office. So we got a lot of different sources, tax credits. So as the entrepreneur, I was basically having to find any way possible to fund this thing because it actually required quite a bit of funding to get this type of hardware developed. I mean, one thing is having lab technology, the other is an industrial, robust system to monitor a chemical reaction in a chemical plant that runs 24/7, is hazardous location certified and safe, right? So that was where we went from there. And so I could keep going, but open another question
Yeah, yeah. Before we get to that, I'd love to just for our audience, because um, I'd like to think, because you mentioned polymers, I'd like to talk about sort of the broader, what I'll call sort of the polymer problem that
Yeah.
you solved here, because whether you're talking about polymers that we find in the biopharmaceutical industry or specialty chemical or material science or whatever, trillions of dollars of this stuff. Okay. But when these materials are made, they have to be made properly. You don't want the wrong product made. You don't want byproducts and all sorts of other things being made. And your technology, I guess the sort of the standard was, hey, we make this batch, it's wrong, we throw it out, we start again. You came up with a solution, said, hey, we can figure out what's going on at every step of the process while you're making it, so you don't have to throw away that batch and waste a lot of money and time. Take us through that, what I'll call the polymer problem, because I think it's kind of elegant.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, I mean, this is an industry that affects all of us every day. I mean, your iPhone, your water bottles. I mean, literally, if you look around you, you're interacting with a bunch of different polymers at any given point in time, your car. And so we take it for granted. And this is some of the great stuff as an entrepreneur. And the curiosity is once you start to learn about these value chains and these supply chains, you see where stuff comes from. You really dig in, you're like, wow, I can't believe, like following this through to get to where we are. Then you go visit these chemical plants and you see, to your point, uh, you know, this is how they make it. There's recipes. They have plant systems all over the world. And so like one company making this type of, say, polymethyl methacrylate, for example, which can be plexiglass and, foam stuff for your car, it can go in bumpers. So, basically you look at that and you say, okay, they have 8 plants all over the world, but they're getting different feedstocks. They've built these plants at different times, so they have different equipment. They have different languages, different people. So it's actually very complicated to standardize a universal global product with the same specification wherever it's made. And so being able to actually control the properties of material is the holy grail of all of this stuff. Right now, you do the best you can, you get averages, you have big spec windows, and you make sure that it works in the given applications. But if you could, for example, make on-command material with very predetermined properties, you could even expand and do it at a price point that's commoditized, which you have already. You could expand the universe of applications tremendously. And so that's what all these companies are always continually improving. They want to get better, cheaper, faster in how they deliver. And they're always looking for new applications. Where else can this material add value? Aerospace, can it go lightweight? Can it have the same properties as steel? Like, so they're always looking for, composites, you name it, different ways to push the envelope of these materials. So it's never static. And so you can imagine as you're pushing the envelope on performance, you also need to catch up with how you produce it. You need to catch up with quality. And so that's really the problem we were looking at is we were able to monitor in real time to give them that ability to control. And we actually developed a lot of IP around the measurement portion, but also the data and the control portion because we knew the end goal was
Mhm.
always autonomous operation. How do you actually use the data to drive control to a set point of a property, for example, at the most efficient, cheapest path, right? And so that is the problem we set out to solve. And that is a very, very challenging problem because you're talking about hundreds of different types of polymers. Each one has their own reaction condition. There's all these different companies out there. So we proved it all in the lab. And as we were rolling it out, we had to continually prove it in new applications, work with different customers. And so we quickly realized, hey, we're going to have to get to scale to do this.
Mhm.
This isn't something you could just bootstrap and fund a little bit. You really got to go all the way if you want to solve this problem. And it's a worthwhile problem to solve given that prize, right, that I
Absolutely.
just outlined.
Absolutely.
Um, and so that's for the polymer side. And on the pharma side, you're talking about safety, stability, optimizing formulation so that, you send out a bunch of stuff that you formulated, you put it on a shelf in a fridge for a year, someone can still inject it and it'll have the same efficacy and it won't create some kind of antigen or other reaction that you don't want in the body.
Yep.
And so a lot of our technology there. So again, that unifying thread was monitoring for control of properties. The other one is monitoring quality, looking at aggregation. That's a big issue. Stability of these mRNA and peptide and protein molecules as you have lipid nanoparticles and different things holding them together in solution, right? Making sure that they're still going to be there ready to work when they're injected. And so yeah, that was those are the two big problems that we were setting out to solve with our IP and our technologies and our products.
Mhm. And yeah, I so much appreciate that story because we talk a lot, about so, okay, this preclinical work and this clip, but what you're talking about is all sort of the really important stuff that happens in between, and to make sure these products are, again, as you say, put them on a shelf. It's the same thing when we go back to it, and yeah. Um, Before, one other thing I was going to ask you about before we get to sort of the scale up and some of your initial investors, because another really interesting part of your story here is the tech transfer part. And I'd love for you to, I've been sort of there myself in some previous careers, and I've seen everything from great tech transfer opportunities, very easy to take that technology out of the university and set something up, and some sort of draconian terms, and you want how much as an
Right.
upfront payment at whatever. But you know where I'm going. I'd love to hear a little bit, how was the process at Tulane in terms of um, you know getting you the right deal and sending you one your way, and so that, hey, you're not gonna require like an eight-figure upfront payment to get this,
Right.
and all that, you know.
And what you're describing is a great way to commit infanticide. I mean, because
Exactly,
basically, like
exactly.
you would kill any opportunity before it's born if you saddle it with any terms like that. And inexperienced entrepreneurs might not know better. I was very lucky that I had the mentors and advisors I did because we knew what we needed to be able to be viable to then go out and raise capital and scale, right? And so there was a learning process. Tulane had not done a lot of startup spinouts. They'd licensed stuff to pharma before, but that's a whole different ballgame. That
Right.
is, big payments and royalties. And so the idea of like equity and how do you do this and how do you do that was relatively new. We were fortunate that our tech transfer office wanted this to happen. So Tulane has continually invested in this. So now they have an innovation institute now. They're really pro getting startups and commercializing research. But it wasn't like that when we started. So there was a little bit of education on both sides. But fortunately, the administration wanted it to happen. So any roadblocks were removed. And in the end, it worked great. We were able to license the technology under very good terms that allowed us to go raise money and do everything we needed to do. We
Yeah.
were also able to even initially lease some space and equipment from the university. So they were flexible. They said, look, uh, we said we don't have capital yet, but we still want to be able to use this. We have all this investment in equipment through the university. Is there a way to work something out for a small period until we get our own facility to work? Because we were starting to get customer interest, things like that. And so they went way outside of their playbook there and found a way to make that happen temporarily. So we were able to do it, get under some temporary lease, and that was all critical. So a lot of credit does go to Tulane for supporting the innovation. Yeah, and even the contracts with industry were fairly unique because we were providing very specific research using our IP. So we had to negotiate rights with like chemical companies and pharma companies where we said, look, anything that improves our IP, we keep, and anything that improves your chemistry or your formulation, that you can own. So we had to work out creative licensing terms
Hmm.
on all of that funded work as well. So throughout the whole process of, I would say, pre the incubation within the university of let's fund research, show value, and that sets the stage for then a spin out,
Yep.
all the way through spin out and even after, the university was very helpful.
Got it. Got it. And as mentioned, you've been very successful in, following that tech transfer in terms of raising private capital. And it looks like that you had a nice little mix in terms of sort of some, I mean, obviously you have some of the grant money, you have traditional venture investors, and then you have some of the corporate venture capital groups like Mitsubishi. I think your current parent company was an investor early on in Yokogawa. Again, say a couple words about that because that's another place. Again, some similarities. I've been sort of in these syndicates that have, maybe a lot of non-traditional investors that don't normally work together. But say a few words. 'Cause it looks like you put together a pretty impressive syndicate here.
Yeah, and I think that again is a testament to where we were and what we had to do to make it go, right? So like we were again in not a very capital rich environment. We did get support locally from and our personal friends and family. So we had some initial capital from friends and family and people affiliated with the university. So we were able to raise some money that way, along with the early customer money and grants. And then we went out and raised our first institutional venture round from they were actually just starting at the time, a group called Energy Innovation Capital. So they're a VC firm focusing on energy transition, and
Hmm.
they were doing a lot of oil and gas tech, bringing Silicon Valley to oil and gas and industrial, and then now more transition, and now they're looking at energy and defense and other applications. So great group. They were supportive. One of their partners was in Houston, George Coyle, and he was involved early, and Kevin Skiller, and they were early at that fund, and they were we got introduction to them through our network, and they believed in what we were doing, and they knew some people in that petrochemical oil and gas space, so they got
Hmm.
feedback like, hey, this is a real problem. It is something if you could provide these types of measurements and do this type of control, that you would add a lot of value. So. They ended up being our first institutional investor. And then we quickly found, and because this business is global, I mean, you're talking, these are multinational petrochemical and pharma companies. So
Right.
you might be talking to a facility in the US, but headquarters is in Asia or Europe. So we quickly realized that the center of gravity and decision making really depended on the organization, where they were based, and how much they did delegate that to regions or not. And so we actually got pulled international pretty quickly, which is very challenging if you're small, right?
Right.
But we did it. So we were interacting with folks in Europe, and then we got pulled into Japan, Korea, and at that time, we saw Japan had a lot of very specialty chemical manufacturing, a lot of higher value type product because the commodity businesses, they don't have a lot of energy. So they basically learned quickly to specialize.
Mm.
So a lot of high value batch type manufacturing. And so we got a lot of interest in Japan. And we actually found Japan to be very forward thinking in terms of, and patient in terms of technology cycle, for deep tech. So they understood the long-term potential and value of the technology, and were very willing to invest. And
Hmm.
so we got customers on the cap table, as investors.
Yep.
Uh, so that was Mitsubishi Chemical and then JSR, which then spun out a piece of their elastomer business to Eneos. But at the time it was JSR and Mitsubishi Chemical. So that then became, as you said, we had the angels, the institutional VC, and then corporate venture groups from customers, which we actually valued quite a bit. And then finally, our last funding, we brought in, which would end up being our acquirer, Yokogawa. So obviously they knew the Japanese market, they knew those customers, and they have a big vision for autonomous operation as well. And so that whole theme of us being this IP protected differentiated measurement, that you could then follow that thread of data all the way to process control, it resonated because that's exactly what they sell control systems and they sell other software packages. So this unique data set that we were able to generate, was high value to them. So we brought them in as investors, and then eventually, it was obvious we needed, as I mentioned before, capacity to scale. So
Hmm.
then we were looking for an acquirer, and they said, "Yeah, well, we're already invested. We like this technology, and we have manufacturing, engineering, all the stuff we needed help with." So they said we can take it. So then they ended up buying us.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the different tools that you ultimately developed and scaled up to work with these major players, and so and again, you take this and go with it as long as you want, but sort of see the ACOMP systems, which look like they're more for the industrial setting, and then you have this current one, Argon, which looks like it's more specific for the biopolymer stuff at the more benchtop related. But I probably skewered that a little bit. But walk us through a little bit about what these final systems are all about. If you could talk a little about the customers.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the ACOMP technology and product that's the embodiment of that IP around real-time polymer monitoring. So that's ACOMP. And so we were selling them for lab system, to pilot and lab scale. And then we had done a number of specialized installs for industrial applications as well. So we had monitored reactions at industrial scale. One of the things that we were then working on was getting a standardized, fully rated, this really technical hazardous location zone 1 type rating, which means that you can basically put it next to a reactor that has chemicals flying out of it and there's no ignition risk, right?
Mm.
So there's a very detailed engineering and design process that you need to follow to make that happen. So we were in the middle of that when we were acquired, and so that was one of many reasons we said we need someone that does this. We're a typical startup, like great engineers, we move fast, we get from 0 to 95% fast. And so we need somebody to help us get this over the goal line to go full industrial on a standardized way. We had done it again on a bespoke way before. And that's what we have in the works now with Yokogawa as the acquirer. And those customers were the ones we were talking about before, the elastomers, the plastics, the specialty coatings, paint chemicals. So anything that's polymer would be the ACOMP technology. So very large, fairly risk averse. I mean, we could talk about the adoption cycle, and I think that's important when you're thinking about deep tech, right?
Sure.
And so the amount of proof points, validation, and things you need to basically take something completely new into something like a production environment in petrochemical, that's a high hurdle. And it's like that in many other industries that are very established, focused on manufacturing, incremental improvement, things like that. And so that was a lot of work to convince customers. We had to do field trials. We would do lab studies at our facility. Their scientists or engineers would come. We'd go to them. So there's a lot of involved work selling to these Fortune 500 pet chem companies, new technology, especially operational technology like that. And so that was that type of mix for ACOMP. On the Argen side, as you mentioned, that's more of a lab instrument. So th this is a very, very valuable lesson learned. It's very hard to do two completely different technologies and two completely different markets. In hindsight, it might have been better to do them separately, but we did it the way we did. And like I said, we had that unifying thread of some of the underlying technology with light scattering and analysis, but it was very challenging to serve those two markets. And so that's a completely different process. That's a lab instrument. You're selling to pharmaceutical scientists primarily, looking to do formulation development or discovery, preclinical stuff. And so completely different set of requirements. You're not industrial, it's lab, and the value proposition is completely different. But at the end of the day, that was embodying the technology around analyzing the stability of the biopharmaceuticals. So that was the main one. And so what we were able to do in that one is monitor independently a number of different samples and apply different stressors to them. So temperature stress, we had stirring stress. And so the value was being able to basically quickly test through a design of experiments your formulations to identify your most stable under whatever stress or condition. So if you think about the manufacturing process of biopharma, you have reactors with impellers, they're pumping stuff through filters. So the shear force on these molecules, and so then the formulation as well
Right.
can create some aggregation or something. So understanding the shear resistance was important, and temperature everyone is testing for. How much can you heat this before the protein denatures or whatever? You know, so basically accelerated testing, can you heat it up a lot and simulate what it would be like? And if you think about it, transportation, do we need to refrigerate this? Do we need to freeze this? What happens if we thaw it and then freeze it? So freeze thaw cycles are important to understand because these are very sensitive molecules. So any way that you could provide an instrument that would deliver information about the stability given those conditions was adding value in that space. So that's what we were focusing on with Argen. And that's what we still are focusing on with Argen.
Mhm. No, no, again, it's impressive that you're able to, and as hard as it may be, or it may have been that you were
Tough.
able to create these two different, product lines. And along that, as we stay on the biopharma sector for a minute, because, we mentioned, some of the, early on, some of the stuff that, your father did in terms of the mRNA and some of the gene therapy stuff. What are some of the sort of the trends that you're seeing? I mean, clearly, because the industry, right, has gone from small molecules into the proteins, and now all this more exotic stuff that gets more personalized. Some of it's alive, right?
Yep.
Um, Personalized for, CAR T cells for a specific patient. Where is a lot of those changes taking you in terms of your thinking, in terms of something like Argon at the bedside, or I mean, again, I'm speaking out of turn here, but as you can make it smaller and more specific to some of these very personalized, living, very expensive biopharmaceutical products.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So right now, the markets are very big, just in what you described, right? The established proteins and peptides, even mRNA, which until COVID was kind of a fantasy, right? It was like, yeah, it's really neat, 10 years, but no product. And now all of a sudden, hey, this stuff works. So we've been mainly focused on those waves, even DNA, capsids and things like
Yep.
that we're looking
Yep.
at. So those waves of okay, all right, now we have a new biopharmaceutical. We still need to formulate it. We still need to stabilize it. We still need to make it commercially. So we haven't gotten yet to the point where it's completely personalized. Because you're right. At that point, what do you need to do if it's like, I don't know, made in the basement of the hospital and
Right.
delivered to
Right.
the patient? Then you need some kind of quality control in that little system. And so we've conceptualized some things. We have IP on that, but the markets are big enough and the FDA approval process. So like all that stuff is far enough out that you got to be thinking about it, but serving what's there is already hugely valuable. And so that's where we've been focused. But to your point, we've already seen just from the proteins now to DNA and mRNA treatments, quite a few waves of innovation. And I'm sure we could talk about AI, right? I mean,
Sure.
but the discovery cycles will get shorter. So I think there's going to be different bottlenecks on safety and quality and things like that. Because I think you're probably going to have far more on the preclinical and discovery side than you could even know what to do with based on
Mhm.
what AI could start to do on that. And then some of the automation that's becoming pretty ubiquitous. So then your bottlenecks will be at the patient level. And before you get to that, which is it safe? Can you formulate it? Can you get it through an approval? So maybe a lot of that innovation around process, um, I see is a trend that is going to be huge because you got to catch up to what AI is going to be able to deliver there. And there's going to be ways to incorporate AI in that as well. So for quality control, being able to maybe use data sets and extrapolate quality based on known behaviors of the physical properties of the material plus some measurement, and then combining those, there's quite a lot of opportunity to enable that directly in those parts of the process as well.
Got it. Got it. No, again, yeah, it's a very interesting segment, and it's gonna be interesting how, again, your product line evolves, especially there. I mean, so clearly, as you mentioned, so Yokogawa aside was a very happy investor. They decided to acquire you. Now you're part of I'm embarrassed to say I was unfamiliar with Yokogawa, but a huge organization,
They're big. Yeah.
17,000 plus employees. And just looking through, so sort of pharma and chemical are sort of one little part of the thing. I mean, they're in everything from wastewater treatment to battery manufacturing to semiconductor, everything in between. What's next? Where does this all go? Because clearly, okay, you're not, okay, it's great, you're part of this, but where are they taking you in terms of, okay, we've done this pharma and chemical thing. Now you're going to do X, Y, and Z.
Well, for them, for us, as you know, for Yokogawa, it's important to actually take these innovations and realize their full potential, right? So that's as a startup, and I think just generally, and I'll come back to Yokogawa specifically, but generally, there's so many companies out there, startups that have deep tech that eventually are going to need to find some strategic partner, some strategic acquirer to truly capture the value and at scale. Now, there's plenty of companies that hit escape velocity, they can attract capital and go to full scale, but there's a lot of really good innovation that's kind of in that in-between space where you really need to find that right partnership, where you have the technology from the startup and the scale from the manufacturer. And so that's where we're at is bridging that divide with Yokogawa now. Is that they bought it, now they need to get it into their systems, to their way of doing things, and then roll it out. And to your point, they're everywhere that you'll find manufacturing. Like anywhere there's some kind of production, their control systems, their sensors, that's where they exist. And so this is a new differentiated way for them in a few different verticals that they're trying to accelerate growth in. So that's why they bought a company like us, and they're out there, buying other companies. Um, I think that's what they look for, and internally growing businesses, right? So they're investing, they're buying whatever it takes to scale, just like any other public automation business. And software is another big play in those spaces. If you look at all the other players in that space, those are big investments that they've made. And again, this comes back to AI and where it fits in. I think those are all things that need to be factored.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's what I noticed one of the things when I was reading up about you prior to the show, you had this nice interview that you gave back at your alma mater at Tulane, and sort of talking about your journey from the lab to global acquisition. Are you doing? I mean, what else are you doing on sort of the entrepreneurial side in terms of sort of teaching the next generation about? I mean, it's an amazing success story, and you're so young. It's great to hear. What are you doing in terms of sort of reconnecting with Tulane in terms of
Yeah.
mentoring the next generation, and then advice for the younger generation that's going to be listening to this episode of our show? Anything you want to mention to them about getting out there and doing an Alex Reed, please.
Yeah. No, great question. Yeah, so one thing I need to mention is at the end of that journey, so 8 years into the journey, we were raising money. We had to move the company to Houston. COVID hit, so it was very hard, right? And at one point, I was even saying, "I'm done," right? I can't do this anymore. I've been CEO for 8 years. This is a challenging journey. I think I need to find somebody to come take my job, and I'll help them get to the next level, and I'll go do something else because burnout's a real thing. I think it's
Sure.
good to talk about it. And so I had hit that point. Now, I was very fortunate. After I told my board of an issue, they said, no, we don't need a CEO change. We just need to make some this and that. I said, no, look, I'm done. I won't leave anyone hanging. I'll finish the raise. I'll finish the move. I'll recruit my replacement. I'll do this in a way that takes care of the people, the company, the technology. This is my baby, right? I've been working on it 8 years. And so they let me go find a replacement. So I found somebody, Jay Manishari,
Hmm.
who was from the automation industry. So he was what I didn't have, which was that knowledge of how these big companies work. He had done turnarounds, he had done management consulting, private. So normally, one piece of advice, I'll have many, but one piece was don't just hire a resume corporate person in a startup. That is not going to work. So if
Yeah.
someone's been at a big company too long, they will not be able to survive an early stage startup, even mid stage, right? because a lot of them are used to working very well within a process. They're not used to building the process, right? And so I made that mistake a couple of times, but I looked at Jay's resume. I said, this guy might be crazy enough because he knows the big companies, but he's done enough other stuff. He might survive. And I had COVID, original COVID, pre-vaccine,
Oh,
and I was doing my screening interviews. I was like, all right, I'll talk to this guy for 30 minutes and let's see if I like him or not. And so I talked to him. We talked for 2.5 hours. Okay. We hit it off, shared values. He got it. He had done process control early in his career, so he knew the problem we were solving with a unique data set. He knew, how big companies buy technology. He knew how to scale. So he had all these things, and he basically said, "You don't need a CEO. I mean, I can show you some pointers." But then I basically was like, "No, no, we need somebody." I didn't say I'm burnt out and I can't do it anymore, but I said we need somebody. Um, and fast forward, long story short, he said, "I'll do it, but only if we do it together as co." Okay.
mm,
Which up to that point, if you had said, "How do you do co-CEO? How does that work?" I would have said, "That's ridiculous. That can't work." Uh, but in this case, it did. And it was the best decision I ever made because I learned a lot from him and he hadn't done startups, so he learned a lot from me. So, that whole approach of, yeah, I was a typical entrepreneur, 60% move fast, good enough, make a decision and move on. He was a little more strategic and methodical, like, all right, well, now think through these things. And for where we were and where we were trying to do to get an acquisition done and partners, that thought process of slowing us down a little bit, and I was pushing him to speed up. So it's kind of a yin and yang, was very, very effective. And then we were able to triangulate with very different perspectives. So the partnership that we developed, doing it as co, uh, that was the only way it worked. And then even post acquisition, we were still running the organization the same way. And so basically, find people like that. That is might be too difficult to recreate because we had shared value. There was too much. I don't think you can just easily find that, but at least find people like that on your management team or advisors, like I had Bill, that can help you get there. Because if you're a first-time entrepreneur, you don't know anything. You don't know what you're doing.
right.
And this goes back to the front end of the segment, which was curiosity. The only way you'll survive as a first-time entrepreneur is you need to learn enough to stay ahead of where your company is at all times.
Yep.
And so if you're not curious, you're not going to learn it. And for me, that meant like everything: finance, how to manage people, product, how to hire engineers, physics, chemistry. I mean, we were running a complicated deep tech business. So like I literally had to learn as much as possible. And I made tons of mistakes. Tons of mistakes. I mean, we could spend a whole segment dissecting every mistake I made, right? But you learn from those, and then you can avoid a lot with advisors and mentors and good people on your team. And so that combination of working with someone like Jay, and that's a relationship for life now. I mean, that was huge. And then the mentors, that's what helped us get to where we were going. And so some of the stuff I do now is pay that forward. Um, so, people, I get a lot of different, advise and recruiting, come run this thing, do that. But at the end of the day, right now, I like helping entrepreneurs. So I'm an entrepreneur in residence for the LePage Center at Tulane. So after the acquisition, Rob Lacko runs that institute, that center, asked if I wanted to join. Says, yeah, of course. And so that, involves talking to people early in the journey, like I was, and so it's a great reminder how much value they get talking to someone who's been through it. Because if you know very little, you can get a lot of value just from an hour discussion.
Yep.
And so a lot of sessions like that. I've done some angel investing, advising different VCs, other CEOs. So I'm staying involved in the ecosystem, deep tech specifically. And I do think one of the things that, like I mentioned before, there's so many great companies out there that need a strategic exit or partner, that I think there's a big opportunity right now, especially in deep tech, where there's been enough funding, but not enough for some of these to get fully realized. And they're not worth just killing either. They have
Right.
great stuff, a lot of great innovation. So I think there's an interesting opportunity in that part of the space as well.
Got it. Got it. Again, a really impressive story, and I appreciate, the way you surround, again, at the end of the day, surrounded yourself with the right people. Obviously, a great mentor, and your father alone there. But no,
Yeah.
it's what else is coming up for you specifically? Because I noticed that, post acquisition, you still were sort of out on the conference circuit a bit at American Chemical Society, giving talks about polymer analytics and process controls and all that. Where should we be finding you for 2025 as we get near 2026? Conferences, talks, other public facing initiatives where we can hear you talk, run into you, and meet you possibly. Anything else on the calendar that's public facing that you might not mention while we have
Yeah, there's the there's a bioprocessing summit coming up in Boston. I'll be at that in a couple weeks, and then in Houston with the team. So different places right now. So a lot of it is more one-on-one discussions and meeting a lot of people because you do this for a long time. It's when you exit, you can take a breather, a
you?
little bit of a breather, and at least reconnect with people, right? And so it's been very much a learning experience to reconnect with a lot of people over the years and see what they're up to. And uh, I'll be remiss if I don't give any credit to my wife, by the way. I
Yeah,
need,
yeah,
before we get off this segment, I must. She met me when I was first starting and she stuck through the whole journey. And so without her support, obviously wouldn't be here. We have two young kids and a wonderful life and family. But she and I are a bit nerdy too. She's vibe coding AI agents, right? And
mm,
so some of the stuff I'm getting really interested in is that space.
got it.
And just like everyone else, mainly just because we're all starting to use it more, we're seeing the potential. How does this go into different workflows? I mean, it's astounding to think how fast this has caught on and how much impact it will have and just how we work day to day. It's already impacting me tremendously. So at night after the kids are asleep, that's what we talk about. Because I was like, wait, I thought I married an English major. She ended up doing customer success at HubSpot and then was at a Series B startup for customer experience. So we've been pretty, nerded out on that stuff for a while. But then, I'm like, well, I thought I married an English major, and she's up there vibe coding AI agents, and I'm just like, wow, like
Yeah.
what world are we in now? So that to me that's a whole nother conversation because then I wonder what my kids are going to do.
Right, right.
Um, but no, I'd say that's one of the areas I'm very interested in spending time on now as well.
Got it. Got it. Well, maybe depending on what happens next, we'll have a follow-up episode and dive deeper into some of those areas. But no, it's again, I when I first read about you, I was just very excited, and I think we had a great conversation, a great entrepreneurial story, a great startup story, a great tech transfer story, a great M&A story, and yeah, I mean it's really impressive, Alex. I have to say, and just really enjoyed the discussion, and wishing you the best for everything that comes next with the company or whatever you decide to do next. Again, for everyone out there that's going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks or who will be watching on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Alex Reed, co-founder, president, chief commercial officer, Yokogawa Fluence Analytics. Alex, again, I want to thank you for taking the time to come talk to us today, tell us your story, an amazing entrepreneurial story. Thank you for everything you do for for all these industries that impact our lives. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us via developing these novel tools. Really a great story, and I wish you the best with it. And I look forward to following up next year.
Thank you, Ira. Really enjoyed it.
Great having you.